Ancient sailors crossed oceans without a single map. This is the untold story of Bronze Age navigators and the mental maps that guided them. You will learn the forgotten art of how to read the world itself, using the stars, winds, and waves as a living compass. How did they find their way across trackless water to connect entire continents? What deep secrets of the sea have we lost to time? What does it truly mean to explore a world with no boundaries? The world of the Bronze Age was a tapestry of rising empires and restless movement. Great civilizations like the Minoans of Crete, the Mycenaeans of mainland Greece, and the Phoenicians of the Levant were not isolated kingdoms. They were seafaring nations, and the vast Mediterranean Sea was not a barrier but their central highway. This was an age defined by a new and powerful hunger for connection. Distant lands held essential resources, the very materials that gave the era its name. Copper from Cyprus and tin from as far away as Britain and Anatolia were shipped across perilous routes to be alloyed into bronze, the lifeblood of tools, weapons, and art. Alongside these raw materials traveled luxury goods, exotic spices, and revolutionary ideas, weaving a web of interdependence that spanned the known world. This burgeoning trade demanded ships that could endure the open sea, and Bronze Age shipwrights answered the call. They moved beyond simple dugout canoes, engineering vessels from carefully fitted planks, sealed with pitch and fastened with sturdy mortise-and-tenon joints. These were the first true deep-water ships, the technological marvels that made crossing the wine-dark sea a reality. But a capable vessel is only half the story. The true challenge lay in guiding it across a horizon that offered no landmarks, into a realm of water and sky where getting lost meant almost certain death. These ships were masterpieces of ancient engineering, built not for calm inland waters but for the unpredictable moods of the open sea. Their hulls were constructed using a technique called shell first. Instead of building a skeleton frame and attaching planks to it, shipwrights would carefully fit long, curved wooden planks directly to one another, edge to edge. They secured these planks with meticulously carved mortise-and-tenon joints. Think of it like a sophisticated wooden puzzle. A tenon, a small rectangular peg, would be cut into the edge of one plank. This peg would then be fitted snugly into a matching mortise, a hollow slot, carved into the neighboring plank. These interlocking joints were then locked in place with wooden pegs, creating a hull that was both incredibly strong and surprisingly flexible. It could twist and bend with the waves instead of fighting them, a vital quality for surviving a sudden Mediterranean storm. A typical sea-going vessel might be around 15 to 20 meters long, powered by a single square sail and a bank of oars for maneuvering. Its hold could carry several tons of cargo, enough to make a long voyage profitable. This was not an empty shell, it was a packed, floating warehouse. Imagine the creak of wood and the smell of salt and pitch. The deck would be stacked with copper ingots, carefully packed pottery, amphorae filled with olive oil and wine, and sacks of grain. Below, in whatever space remained, the crew would sleep, eat, and take shelter. This ship was their entire world for weeks or even months at a time. Every aspect of its design was a response to the sea. A deep keel provided stability against sideways drift. The combination of sail and oars gave them a fighting chance whether the wind was favorable or completely absent. For coastal trips, they could rely more on the oars skirting the shoreline. But for the long, daring open water crossings that connected islands and continents, they raised that single large sail, trusting the wind to carry them into the vast blue unknown. The ship's very existence made exploration possible, but its limitations defined the navigator's ultimate challenge. With no land in sight for days, the only reliable guide was the endless dome of the sky. Out on the open sea, beneath a dome of endless black, the only fixed points were the lights overhead. For a Bronze Age sailor, the night sky was not a random scattering of stars. It was a living, turning map, a grand celestial clockwork they learned to read as naturally as we read street signs. They knew the constellations that marked the seasons, and most importantly, the ones that never strayed from their posts. While our familiar North Star, Polaris, was not yet perfectly aligned at the celestial pole in that era, there were other circumpolar stars that traced circles around the sky's fixed pivot point. By watching which stars never dipped below the horizon, a navigator could always find north. They memorized the star paths, learning which brilliant points would rise in the east and set in the west at different times of the year. This knowledge transformed the heavens into a reliable compass. This celestial map demanded more than just casual observation. Over generations, sailors developed simple but brilliant tools to translate the sky's position into actionable data. One of the earliest was likely a device called a camel. Imagine a small, rectangular piece of wood with a string tied through its center. The sailor would hold the string at a specific length between their teeth and move the wooden card closer or farther from their eye until its top and bottom edges precisely framed a particular star, like the North Star, against the horizon. The point where the knot was held on the string corresponded to a known latitude. It was a tangible, physical record of a celestial angle, a way to measure your north-south position on the vast, featureless ocean. This was not high technology. It was profound, practical wisdom carved from wood and cord. This sacred knowledge was not written down in manuals. It was a closely guarded oral tradition, passed from master to apprentice, from parent to child within seafaring families. A young sailor would spend years memorizing star songs and chants that described the rising and setting of constellations, learning to feel the rhythm of the cosmos in his bones. He would learn that when a certain cluster of stars dipped toward the western horizon at dusk, it was time to sail for a specific island group. This was a living library carried in the minds of navigators, and its survival depended on flawless memorization and direct experience. With this knowledge, they could sail for days across open water with a confidence that seems almost supernatural to us today. Yet the stars were only part of the story. When the sun rose, banishing the star map from view, a new set of guides took their place on the stage. With the sunrise, the star map faded, but a new and equally reliable guide took its place. The sun itself became their primary compass. Its daily journey was a metronome of direction, a rhythm every sailor knew by heart. Emerging from the eastern horizon at dawn, it bathed the sea in gold and provided an unwavering reference point. Throughout the day, they could track its arc across the sky, and as it dipped below the western waves at dusk, it confirmed their orientation once more. This daily cycle offered a constant reset, a way to check and correct their heading after a long night of sailing by the stars. It was a simple, profound truth. East was where the sun was born, west was where it died, and their course was set between these two certainties. When darkness fell again, another celestial body often took center stage. The moon served as a nighttime sun, its brilliant, changing face offering its own kind of guidance. Its predictable phases were a calendar in the sky. A full moon could illuminate the seascape for nights on end, revealing distant cloud formations over unseen islands or the subtle texture of the waves. A new moon meant profound darkness, but also the clearest view of the starry compass. More than just a source of light, the moon's movement across the sky could supplement the stars. On a night when patchy clouds obscured a crucial constellation, the moon's steady glow could still indicate east or west, keeping them roughly on course. Its gravitational pull governed the tides, and understanding this rhythm was crucial for any landing on a foreign shore. Knowing when high tide would cover a rocky ledge or when low tide would expose a sandy beach could mean the difference between a successful trade and a shattered hull. This deep connection to celestial cycles extended beyond the daily and monthly. There is compelling evidence that land-based observatories, like mysterious stone circles and aligned megaliths, served as grand calibration tools for these seafarers. Imagine a massive stone structure on a prominent headland, its central alignment pointing directly to the sunset on the summer solstice. For a navigator preparing to embark on a long voyage, sighting the sun through those ancient stones was not a ritual. It was a critical piece of data. It confirmed the solar calendar, telling him the precise time of year and, by extension, what winds and currents to expect on his journey. These structures permanently etched the sun's most extreme positions into the landscape, turning the Earth itself into a cosmic clock face that oriented all who knew how to read it. Together, the sun and moon were more than distant lights. They were living clocks and compasses, their movements woven into the very fabric of navigational lore. But the most immediate signs of the way home were written not in the sky, but in the water and air all around them. The sea itself spoke a language of motion, a grammar written in wind and water. Bronze Age sailors did not just endure the elements, they listened to them, learning to read the atmosphere and the ocean as a living map. They knew the winds not as random gusts, but as ancient, predictable forces, each with its own personality and purpose. In the Aegean, the Etesian winds would blow with steady force from the north during the summer, becoming a natural engine for ships sailing south toward Egypt or Crete. A shift in the wind's direction or a sudden change in its feel on the skin could signal an approaching storm long before any clouds appeared on the horizon. This was a knowledge born of pure survival, a deep memory of which winds brought safe passage and which ones promised disaster. They learned the rhythms of the seasons, understanding that certain routes were only possible during specific months when the winds were their allies, not their adversaries. Beneath the surface, another force was at work, a hidden river flowing within the sea. Ocean currents, like the great conveyor belt of the Mediterranean, were mental highways charted over countless voyages. A sailor would learn that a specific current flowing east to west could carry his ship effortlessly for dozens of miles, saving precious days and conserving the crew's energy. Conversely, fighting against a powerful current was a losing battle that could exhaust a crew and drain their water supplies. They came to recognize the subtle signs of these underwater rivers, the slight change in water temperature, the different kinds of debris carried along, even the specific marine life that thrived in their flow. This was not a science of charts and measurements, but a tactile, experienced wisdom passed down through stories and songs. A master navigator could dip his hand in the water and, feeling its temperature and movement, understand exactly where the current was taking him. The very waves lapping against the hull told a story of the world beyond the horizon. A seasoned sailor could interpret their patterns like words on a page. A long, gentle swell from a consistent direction spoke of vast, open water, but a sudden, confused chop, with waves intersecting from multiple angles, often hinted at unseen land disrupting the sea's rhythm, perhaps a distant island or a hidden shoal. The way waves reflected off a cliff face miles away created a distinct pattern on the surface, a visible echo of the invisible coast. The color of the water itself was a guide. Deep, dark indigo meant profound depths, while a shift to a lighter, greener hue signaled shallows and the possible approach to land. They were reading the sea's texture, its color, and its sound, transforming a seemingly uniform expanse into a landscape rich with information. This intimate knowledge of wind, current, and wave turned the chaotic sea into a familiar, readable road, and the final, most vital signs of land came not from the water itself, but from the life it sustained. A distant speck in the sky was more than just a bird, it was a message. When a Bronze Age sailor saw a tern or a gull flying with determined purpose, not randomly circling, he knew it was heading back to its nest at the end of the day. That single winged creature was a living arrow pointing directly toward land, often long before any shore was visible to the human eye. These navigators committed entire avian migration routes to memory. They knew that spotting a specific type of seabird meant they were within a certain range of an island chain, its flight path a mental marker etched not on parchment but in experience. The direction the birds flew at dawn and dusk painted invisible highways in the sky, revealing the location of unseen islands over the horizon. This was bionavigation, an art of reading the world's inhabitants as vital signposts. Beneath the waves, another layer of the map came to life. The presence of certain fish species or marine mammals was not random, it was deeply informative. A school of a particular coastal fish indicated shallower waters and the approaching continental shelf. The sudden appearance of dolphins, which often follow underwater terrain features and current lines, could signal a specific channel or the mouth of a distant river. Even the color and type of seaweed floating past the hull told a story. Thick, drifting mats of vegetation might speak of a large river system emptying into the sea far away, carrying the debris of a continent. A piece of waterlogged, moss-covered driftwood was not just flotsam, it was a clue. Its type of wood could hint at the forests of a distant land, its condition suggesting how long it had been at sea, and therefore how far away that land might be. Every floating leaf and every diving bird provided another tiny data point, another fine detail to be added to the constantly evolving mental chart. This required a form of observation so deep it became instinct. A master navigator did not just see a bird, he interpreted its species, its altitude, its behavior, and the time of day. He synthesized this with the feel of the current, the taste of the air, and the pattern of the swells. This knowledge was not acquired quickly. It was a wisdom honed over a lifetime of watching, waiting, and remembering, a continuous conversation with the natural world. These biological signposts provided the crucial fine print on their mental maps, the intimate details that turned a general direction into a specific destination. But how did these men compile all these celestial, oceanic, and biological clues into a reliable guide? How do you build a map that exists nowhere but in the mind? This living map was not drawn on papyrus or carved in stone. It was etched into memory, a living library carried in the mind of the navigator. Picture an elder sailor, his face weathered by salt and sun, sitting with a young apprentice under a star-filled sky. He does not unroll a chart. Instead, he begins to speak, his voice a low rhythm like the waves. He describes a voyage not in miles but in experiences. He recites the precise sequence of headlands, the exact number of days spent sailing with a specific star rising ahead, the peculiar rock formation that looks like a sleeping giant when approached from the south, and the specific species of tern that appears 2 days out from a safe harbor. Every detail is a data point, the taste of the water from a certain spring on a particular island, the sound of the wind channeling through a narrow strait. The smell of the pine forests carried on the offshore breeze from a coast still below the horizon. This was the database of Bronze Age navigation, a vast and intricate collection of geographic knowledge stored entirely through human recollection. To make this immense amount of information unforgettable, they wove it into the fabric of story and song. A voyage to a distant source of tin was not a list of coordinates. It was an epic poem. The rhythm of the oars became the rhythm of the chant. The rising of a constellation was a verse. The sighting of a specific bird was the chorus. These songs encoded sailing directions, turning abstract concepts into memorable narratives. A line in a song might translate to, "Sail east with the Great Bear on your left shoulder for 5 nights, until you see the high, dark island where the gulls circle at dawn. Then turn your prow toward the morning sun." The melody and the rhythm acted as mnemonic devices, locking the vital sequence of events into a form that was easily recalled, even in the stress of a storm. This was how they built their mental maps, layer by layer, voyage by voyage, story by story. The accuracy of these oral maps was astonishing. They contained not just the route, but the vital infrastructure of survival and trade. A song would detail the location of a hidden freshwater spring on a seemingly barren island, a secret known only to those who possessed the verse. It would describe the submerged reef that lurks just beneath the surface at a certain tide, its danger immortalized in a warning line. It would name the beach with the calmest anchorage and the village whose chief was welcoming to traders. This knowledge was a form of wealth more valuable than the cargo in the hold. It was a communal treasure safeguarded by families and guilds of sailors, refined and corrected with each new generation that ventured out. A single error in the oral record could mean the loss of an entire ship and its crew, so the responsibility to remember correctly was a matter of life and death. The absence of physical maps did not mean these sailors had a primitive understanding of the world. Their geographic knowledge was profound, but it was stored differently. It was stored in a living, breathing network of shared experience. It was dynamic, updated with every new voyage, every strange current reported by a returning captain, every new star path observed. This deep reliance on memory and the spoken word, on knowledge passed from mouth to ear and heart to heart, connects to something even deeper than practical seamanship. It hints at a world where the journey was not just a physical endeavor, but a sacred one. This intimate, memorized knowledge of the sea and stars was intertwined with the myths, the gods, and the very symbols that gave their world meaning. The sea was not just a physical expanse, it was a sacred text. For the Bronze Age navigator, the line between a landmark and a divine symbol did not exist. A solitary, storm-racked island was not merely a rock, it was the home of a god. A strangely shaped sea stack rising from the waves was not an erosion feature. It was a petrified giant defeated in an ancient myth. These stories were not mere entertainment for the long nights at sea. They were the very operating system of their world, a way of encoding practical, life-saving information into unforgettable allegory. Think of the epic voyages preserved in poems like the Odyssey. The island of the Cyclops was not just a fictional danger, it was a mythological waypoint, a story that likely encapsulated the very real perils of landing on an unfamiliar, hostile shore where the inhabitants were not welcoming to strangers. The tale of the sirens, whose beautiful song lured sailors onto sharp rocks, is a perfect allegory for the deceptive dangers of a coastline where currents pull vessels toward a lethal reef. The story made the hazard memorable, transforming a complex nautical warning into a vivid, moral narrative that every crew member would recall with a shudder. Every prominent headland, every sacred spring, every mountain that pierced the sky was a character in this living story. A distinctive double-peaked mountain visible from far out to sea might be known as the shoulders of a sleeping titan. That was its name, its identity. To sail toward those peaks was to navigate by the body of a god. A grove of ancient trees on a distant cape, a place known as the sanctuary of a nymph, was not just a spiritual site. It was a critical physical marker. The story of the generous nymph who offered fresh water to weary travelers directly pointed to the existence of a reliable spring at that very location, a secret perhaps known only to those who understood the myth. The landscape itself was a cathedral, and every voyage through it was a pilgrimage. This symbolic navigation required more than just sharp eyesight. It demanded a profound, ritualistic connection to the world. Before a long voyage, crews might make offerings at a seaside temple, not merely for divine favor, but to align themselves spiritually with the journey ahead. They were entering a realm of stories, and they needed to be in harmony with its rules. To know that a certain whirlpool was the lair of a sea monster was to understand its power and to approach it with the respect and caution such a force demanded. This mythological layer did not replace the practical knowledge of stars and currents. It completed it. It wove the cold data of navigation into the warm, living fabric of culture and belief. The journey became a saga. The sailor was not just a merchant or an explorer. He was a hero moving through a world alive with meaning, where every successful landing was a small victory in an eternal story written on the waves and in the stars. The launch of a deep water vessel was a moment of profound gravity, marked not by celebration but by solemn ceremony. On a windswept beach, the crew would gather before a stone altar, the air thick with the scent of burning incense and salt spray. They made offerings to the gods of the sea and the winds, pouring libations of wine or oil into the sand, a plea for safe passage and favorable currents. This was far more than superstition. It was a critical psychological and practical step, a final rehearsal before committing their lives to the unknown. The ritual served to align every single man with the voyage plan, transforming a collection of individuals into a single, focused unit with a shared purpose. As the chants echoed and the offerings were accepted, the abstract idea of the journey became a tangible, collective mission. Every man heard the names of the destinations, the stars they would follow, and the challenges they might face, reinforcing the oral map they all had to carry in their minds. This communal focus was their first and most vital piece of equipment. The timing of these departures was itself a sacred science. A voyage did not begin on a random day. The master navigator waited for specific celestial signals, the most important being the heliacal rising of a key star. This is the day a star, after being hidden by the sun's glare for a season, first becomes visible again in the pre-dawn sky. The appearance of a specific constellation, like Sirius or the Pleiades, on the eastern horizon just before sunrise was a cosmic starting gun. It signaled a shift in the seasons, the onset of predictable winds, and the opening of a navigational window. To sail before this celestial event was to invite disaster. To sail after it was to follow a divine schedule written in the stars themselves. This deep integration of ritual and astronomy provided an immense psychological anchor. The ceremonies at the shore affirmed their connection to the land and its gods, while the celestial timing connected them to the orderly cosmos. This dual assurance built a bedrock of confidence, a necessary shield against the terror of the open ocean. In the face of howling storms and disorienting fog, a crew could cling to the memory of the ritual and the certainty of the star that had guided their departure. The line between the spiritual and the practical was invisible to them. A prayer for a good wind was as logical as adjusting the sail. An offering to a sea god was as sensible as checking the hull for leaks. They understood the journey as a single, continuous experience that engaged the body, the mind, and the spirit in equal measure. This holistic wisdom was their true compass, guiding them through both the visible perils of the sea and the invisible fears of the human heart. Trust was the true ballast in a ship's hull, a weight more vital than any stone. For weeks on end, with nothing but the endless blue horizon as their companion, a crew's collective sanity depended on a fragile, unspoken pact. They had to trust the master navigator's silent calculations, the strength of the ship's timbers, and the shared memory of the star songs that promised a destination. This psychological resilience was not an accident. It was a carefully cultivated discipline, the invisible rigging that held their entire world together. Leadership aboard ship was absolute and clear, a chain of command that left no room for debate in a crisis. The captain or master navigator held the final say, his authority rooted in proven experience and deep knowledge. This clarity prevented the paralysis of fear. When a storm hit or the winds died, the crew did not have to wonder what to do. They had their assigned tasks, a rhythm of shared labor that gave purpose to every waking hour. Bailing water, adjusting ropes, or taking a turn at the oars, these were not just chores. They were acts of defiance against the chaos of the sea, small, manageable actions that reinforced their control over an uncontrollable environment. Morale was actively managed, not left to chance. During the long, dark watches of the night, stories were told. The same epic poems that encoded navigational data also served to remind the men of who they were. They were the descendants of heroes, men who had faced monsters and tempests and prevailed. This shared cultural identity was a shield against despair. The voyage itself became part of this ongoing saga, their present hardships framed as just another chapter in an ancient and honorable story. The navigator himself practiced a form of mental wayfinding, breaking the immense, terrifying journey into a series of tiny, achievable goals. The objective was not some distant, abstract shore weeks away. The goal was to maintain course until a specific star reached its zenith. The goal was to catch a favorable shift in the current by midday. The goal was to spot the expected migratory birds by tomorrow's dawn. Each small success was a victory, a psychological milestone that proved they were on the right path and inching closer to home. This constant focus on the immediate present kept the terrifying scale of the ocean at bay. Their confidence was not blind faith. It was built on the rock of repetitive observation. Every sunrise confirmed their east-west orientation. Every familiar star that rose precisely on time reinforced the accuracy of their course. This daily, hourly validation of their methods built a profound, earned trust in the natural world's predictability. The sea was not their enemy, it was a partner whose language they had learned to speak. This deep-seated trust, forged through shared labor and confirmed by the cosmos, allowed them to venture farther than we might think possible. Consider the incredible voyage to the source of tin, a metal absolutely essential for making bronze. Geological evidence tells us that much of the tin used in the Mediterranean came from as far away as Cornwall in the southwestern tip of Britain. This was not a coastal hop. It meant a monumental open water crossing from the coast of Brittany in modern-day France, a direct sail across the treacherous Bay of Biscay and up into the wilds of the Atlantic. It was a journey of hundreds of miles out of sight of any land, guided only by the sun, the stars, and the long, rolling swells of the ocean. To even attempt such a crossing required a level of psychological fortitude that borders on the superhuman. These men were not just sailors, they were pioneers of the human spirit, pushing the boundaries of the known world by first mastering the frontiers of their own fear. Herodotus, the Greek historian, recorded a story that stretches our understanding of Bronze Age seamanship to its absolute limit. He tells of a voyage commissioned by the Egyptian pharaoh Necho around 600 BC, a mission entrusted to a crew of Phoenician sailors. Their orders were audacious: to sail south from the Red Sea, to follow the coastline of Africa until they eventually returned to the Mediterranean by sailing north through the Pillars of Hercules. For 3 long years, these men were gone, a silence that must have convinced the pharaoh they were lost forever. Then, miraculously, they returned, completing a circumnavigation of the entire African continent. The most compelling detail in their report, one that Herodotus himself found difficult to believe, was their claim that as they sailed on their westward journey around the southern tip of the land, the sun lay to their right to the north. This observation, which seemed so illogical to a Mediterranean dweller, is in fact precisely what a sailor would witness after crossing the equator in the southern hemisphere. It is a tiny, almost offhand detail that rings with the unmistakable tone of truth. The sheer feasibility of such a journey has been debated for centuries. Could a Bronze Age vessel, with its simple square sail and reliance on oars, possibly accomplish such a monumental feat? The answer lies not in a single, non-stop epic, but in the practical reality of staged exploration. The Phoenicians were the supreme maritime traders of their age, masters of establishing coastal outposts and trading ports. A journey around Africa would not have been a mad dash into the unknown. It would have been a slow, methodical process of hopscotching along the coast. They would sail for a few weeks, then land to repair their ship, replenish their water from rivers, and hunt or trade with local communities for food. They would wait for the right seasonal winds to carry them further, perhaps spending months in a single bay before the weather turned in their favor. Their deep knowledge of currents would have been their greatest ally. They could have used the Agulhas current to speed their journey southward along Africa's eastern coast, and then, after rounding the Cape, caught the Bengla current to carry them northward along the western shore. This was not a blind journey. It was a masterclass in applied environmental knowledge, using the ocean's own highways to fuel a voyage of unprecedented scale. Whether this specific expedition happened exactly as Herodotus recorded is perhaps less important than what the story itself represents. The very fact that such a tale was told and believed speaks volumes about the perceived capabilities of ancient mariners. It reflects a cultural memory of vast journeys, of horizons pushed so far back that they looped all the way around. This was not a world of small, timid coasting voyages. It was a world where sailors understood that the sea was a single, connected body of water, and that with enough skill, patience, and courage, you could follow its shores to the very ends of the earth and back again. The true map of the Bronze Age was not drawn on clay or parchment. It was etched into the very currents of the Mediterranean, a living chart woven from the ceaseless flow of trade. Think of this ancient sea not as a barrier between civilizations, but as a vibrant, pulsing network of exchange. The Minoan ship carrying olive oil from Crete, the Mycenaean vessel laden with perfumed oil, the Phoenician trader with a hold full of precious crimson dye. Each was tracing a line on this invisible collective map. The most vital lines on this chart were drawn by essential resources. Copper from the rich mines of Cyprus traveled west to the Greek mainland. Tin, the other crucial component of bronze, arrived from distant and mysterious sources, perhaps as far away as Britain and Anatolia. Silver from Anatolian mountains, elegant pottery from Aegean workshops, and exotic ivory from Africa all moved along these established sea lanes. The path a shipment of copper ingots took from a Cypriot harbor to a Mycenaean palace was not a random route. It was a highway refined over generations, its every landmark and seasonal hazard committed to memory. The harbors themselves were the vital nodes where this mental map was constantly updated and expanded. In the bustling port of a place like Ugarit on the Levantine coast or Kamos on southern Crete, sailors from a dozen different cultures would mingle. Here on sun-baked quaysides, amidst the smell of salt and spices, the most valuable commodity traded was not copper or ivory, but information. A captain just back from the Libyan coast would share news of a newly discovered freshwater spring. A navigator from the Aegean might warn of a submerged reef that had wrecked a ship near his home island. Another would describe the strange currents he encountered sailing west of Sicily. Every anecdote, every warning, and every discovery was a new piece of data, meticulously incorporated into the shared geographic knowledge of the seafaring community. This constant, informal exchange created a collective intelligence that was far more accurate and up-to-date than any single person could ever hope to possess. An individual sailor might know the route to Egypt intimately, but through the harbor network, he could learn about the passage to Sardinia from someone who had sailed it a dozen times. Exploration was not driven by abstract curiosity, but by the relentless engine of commerce, the search for a new source of tin, a more efficient route for transporting lapis lazuli, or a market for unique pottery motivated ships to push beyond the known. Profit was the powerful incentive that financed these risky voyages and rewarded the navigators who successfully refined their science. A merchant who could reliably bring a new, valuable commodity to market would gain immense wealth and influence. This practical need to find, transport, and trade is what funded the development of better ships and sharper navigational skills, pushing the boundaries of the known world further out with each generation. The evidence of this vast, interconnected world is not lost. It lies buried in the silt of ancient harbors and scattered on the seafloor. The scattered cargo of a shipwreck, a mix of Cypriot copper, Aegean pottery, and Canaanite jars, tells a silent story of its intended route. The architectural remains of a foreign trading post on a distant shore speak of a permanent line drawn on the mental map. These physical fragments are the echoes of a conversation that once spanned the entire sea, a conversation conducted not with words, but with the movement of goods and the shared knowledge of the sailors who carried them. The silent testimony of a shipwreck speaks louder than any ancient text. Off the rugged coast of southern Turkey, the deep sea holds a time capsule known as the Uluburun shipwreck, a vessel that sank in the late 14th century BC. When archaeologists carefully excavated its remains, they uncovered a floating microcosm of the entire Bronze Age world. Its hull was packed with 10 tons of Cypriot copper ingots alongside raw tin, likely from Anatolia or even farther afield. But it was the personal items that breathed life into the story. There were Canaanite jewelry, Mycenaean swords, Egyptian scarabs, and even a stone scepter, all lying alongside the simple wooden writing boards and fishing weights of the crew. This single vessel was a melting pot of cultures, its cargo a physical map of trade routes stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Nile Delta. The ship itself was a testament to the shell-first construction technique, its planks joined by mortise-and-tenon, a design so effective it would be used for centuries. This was not an isolated trader. It was a clear, tangible piece of evidence that these long-distance voyages were not only possible, they were routine. The story of Bronze Age navigation is also written in the pottery scattered along ancient shorelines. Archaeologists can trace the ghostly outlines of sea lanes by following the distribution of specific pottery styles. A distinctive type of Mycenaean stirrup jar used for transporting olive oil appears in coastal settlements from Greece to Sicily to Sardinia and even to the shores of Canaan. Each fragment of that recognizable pottery is like a breadcrumb left along a trail, marking a well-traveled maritime highway. These artifacts do not simply indicate trade, they reveal the flow of information. A new pottery shape appearing suddenly in a foreign port signals a direct and sustained connection, a sharing of ideas and aesthetics across the water. Coastal settlements themselves were strategic nodes in this vast network. A village built on a promontory with a protected cove and a fresh water source was not there by accident. It was a deliberate way station positioned at a day's sail from the next safe harbor. These locations, like waypoints on a modern GPS, were integral to the mental maps of navigators. They knew that after sailing with the North Star on their left for 2 nights, they would find a sheltered bay with fresh water and a welcoming community. The very existence of these settlements, often in otherwise inhospitable locations, confirms a deep, shared understanding of geography and distance among seafaring peoples. This physical evidence from wrecks and settlements paints a stunning picture of a profoundly connected world, a globalized economy millennia before the term was invented. Yet this revelation raises an even more compelling question. With such complex routes and vital knowledge, how did they manage it all without a single written map or sailing manual? How do you communicate a continent without writing it down? A spiral carved into a coastal rock face was not just art, it was a message. For a Bronze Age sailor stepping onto an unfamiliar shore, these petroglyphs were the silent signposts of the ancient world. Etched into stone at key landing sites, they formed a universal language that transcended spoken words. A series of cup-like depressions might point the way to a hidden freshwater spring, a resource more precious than gold after weeks at sea. A carving of a wave pattern could warn of a treacherous submerged reef just offshore. A distinct star shape aligned with a distant mountain peak might indicate the only safe channel into a lagoon. These symbols were a permanent public backup to the guarded oral traditions, a shared library of survival information left for any knowledgeable traveler who passed by. This system of markers extended beyond small carvings to encompass the very landscape itself. Towering megalithic structures, those mysterious stone circles and long alignments found on headlands and high places, likely served a dual purpose. While their spiritual significance is undeniable, their practical utility for a navigator was profound. A stone circle could function as a grand solar observatory. A navigator could stand at a central stone and, sighting through 2 distant pillars, watch the sun set directly between them on the summer solstice. This was not a vague ritual, it was a critical calibration. It confirmed the solar calendar with absolute precision, telling him the exact time of year and, by extension, what winds and currents to expect on his upcoming voyage. These monuments permanently fixed celestial events to the earthly landscape, turning promontories into cosmic clock faces. Together, the small petroglyphs and the grand stoneworks created a physical network of information that stretched across coastlines. They were the Bronze Age equivalents of buoys and lighthouses, a permanent and reliable system that worked in all weather, day or night. A sailor did not need to understand the local chieftain's language, he only needed to read the symbols on the stones. This visual language was part of an evolving collective body of knowledge, a testament to a shared desire to make the dangerous edges of the world just a little safer for those who dared to cross the sea. It reveals a world where every traveler was part of a community, bound by the unspoken agreement that knowledge, especially the kind that saved lives, was meant to be shared, even if only through the silent, enduring voice of stone. The knowledge of the sea was not a static library, but a living, breathing entity that grew with every voyage. Each successful journey added a new landmark to their mental atlas, while every ship lost to a hidden reef or a sudden squall taught a brutal, unforgettable lesson. This was a science forged through slow, patient iteration over centuries. The earliest sailors likely clung to the coastline, moving from one visible headland to the next in short, cautious hops. But as confidence grew and patterns emerged, they began to connect the dots across open water. a sailor might notice that a specific island, though invisible from his home shore, lay directly beneath the rising point of a bright star. This single observation could transform a multi-day coastal trek into a daring 2-day open water crossing, saving precious time and avoiding treacherous coastal currents. The mental map was constantly being redrawn, its blank spaces filled in one star path and one bird migration at a time. This evolution was fueled by the meeting of cultures in bustling port cities. When a Minoan sailor shared a cup of wine with an Egyptian counterpart, they were not just trading goods, they were trading secrets. The Minoan might describe the reliable northerly winds of the Aegean summer, while the Egyptian could explain the complex currents of the Nile Delta. This cross-pollination of knowledge was invaluable. A Phoenician navigator's trick for reading long-distance swells could be combined with a Mycenaean star chart, creating a hybrid technique more robust than anything developed in isolation. The most effective practices survived and were refined, while less reliable methods were discarded, often at a terrible cost. This collective wisdom, passed down and improved upon for generations, became their most valuable inheritance. Yet this profound knowledge was also incredibly fragile. A master navigator lost at sea could take a lifetime of accumulated secrets with him, an entire school of thought, a unique way of reading the waves or interpreting a constellation, could vanish in a single storm. The oral tradition was both their greatest strength and their most vulnerable point of failure. It was a magnificent, ever-expanding mental cathedral of geographic knowledge, but one built on a foundation of human memory, susceptible to the inevitable erosion of time and tragedy. Even the most skilled navigator could be humbled by a sudden squall. A bank of cloud racing across the sky could erase the star map in minutes, leaving the ship adrift in a world of grey water and howling wind. Without the sun or stars, there was no way to know which direction they were drifting, a terrifying disorientation that could last for days. This was the fundamental limitation of their art. They could determine their north-south position, their latitude, with remarkable accuracy using the height of the stars, but they had no reliable way to measure their east-west position, their longitude. A navigator might know he was at the correct latitude for his home island, but a persistent current could have pushed him dozens of miles to the east or west without his knowledge. He could sail along that line of latitude for days, completely missing his target, his supplies dwindling as he searched for a coastline that never appeared. This inherent uncertainty meant that every open water crossing was a calculated gamble, a leap of faith across an invisible grid where only one axis was truly known. Their entire system depended on the clarity of the heavens. A week of overcast skies was more than an inconvenience. It was a crisis. Without celestial fixes, they had to rely solely on their reading of the waves and winds, skills that could be easily confused by shifting weather patterns. The dead calm of a windless day was another kind of prison, leaving them stranded on a glassy sea, their sail hanging limp, their oars powerless against the vastness. These conditions forced them into a seasonal rhythm. The summer months, with their predictable winds and generally stable weather, were the only safe window for long voyages. The winter sea was a different beast, ruled by ferocious storms and unpredictable gales. From late autumn through early spring, the ships were hauled onto the beach, their timbers repaired, their crews waiting for the celestial signals that would once again open the highways of the sea. Beyond the elements, human dangers lurked. Piracy was a constant threat. A fast ship emerging from a hidden cove could mean the loss of a precious cargo and the enslavement or death of the entire crew. The fear of getting hopelessly lost, of becoming a ghost ship doomed to wander until the water and food ran out, was a shadow that followed every vessel beyond the horizon. This is why exploration was never undertaken lightly. A voyage required a powerful reason, immense preparation, and a cargo valuable enough to justify the very real risk of total loss. The established trade routes were not random. They were the proven paths, the ones where the risks were understood and manageable. They were the mental superhighways, refined over generations because the alternative, the uncharted sea, was a gamble only the most desperate or daring would take. Recognizing these immense constraints does not diminish their achievements. It makes them breathtaking. Every artifact recovered from a distant shore, every trace of a foreign culture found in an ancient city, is a testament to a success against staggering odds. It was this calculated daring, this acceptance of profound risk in pursuit of connection, that first wove the world together. The Phoenician sailors who dared to circumnavigate Africa were not an isolated marvel, but a vital link in an unbroken chain of seafaring wisdom that stretched across millennia. The profound knowledge of winds, currents, and stars, meticulously gathered by Bronze Age mariners, did not simply vanish with the collapse of their empires. Instead, it seeped into the very foundations of navigation, passed down through generations to shape the voyages of all who followed. Consider the Vikings, whose longships crossed the North Atlantic to reach the shores of North America. Their success was not born in a vacuum. They used many of the same tools, reading the flight paths of birds to find land and observing the behavior of whales to locate feeding grounds, techniques that would have felt deeply familiar to a Minoan sailor 1,000 years earlier. They, too, relied on sunstones, crystals that could pinpoint the sun's position through dense cloud cover, a technological echo of the ancient Camel. The legacy was not just in grand voyages, but in the small, essential practices. The simple lead line, used for centuries to measure ocean depth and sample the seafloor, has direct origins in the Bronze Age. A sailor would lower a lead weight coated in tallow to the bottom, then examine the sediment that stuck to it. Sand might mean one type of coast, while shells or mud indicated another, allowing a navigator to confirm his position even in poor visibility. This was a tactile, direct form of wayfinding that required no written charts, a perfect continuation of the ancient art of reading the world itself. This accumulated knowledge eventually crystallized into the first true sea charts of medieval Europe, the Portolan maps. These were not maps of the interior, but stunningly accurate depictions of coastlines, with a web of room lines radiating from central points to guide a sailor from port to port. They were, in essence, the physical manifestation of the Bronze Age mental map. The information encoded in those intricate lines, the shape of a bay, the distance between headlands, the location of a safe harbor, was data that had been carried in oral traditions for over 2,000 years. The Portolan chart was the old star song, finally written down on parchment. This unbroken chain of exploration leads directly to the age of discovery. When Columbus set sail across the Atlantic, or when Magellan's fleet embarked on its circumnavigation, they were standing on the shoulders of Phoenician, Greek, and Viking mariners. They used refined versions of ancient tools and sailed with a confidence born from centuries of accumulated trial and error. The very idea that the world's oceans were a connectable system, that one could sail from one known point to an unknown destination and return, was a Bronze Age concept. Their greatest legacy is not a single route or technique, but the revolutionary belief that the entire world could be mapped and connected by sea. This forces us to ask a profound question. When we celebrate the famous explorers of recorded history, are we not also honoring the anonymous, forgotten navigators of the deep past, the ones who first taught humanity how to navigate the trackless blue? Our history books have long enshrined the 15th century as the Great Age of Exploration, a title that feels increasingly narrow the further we look back. This conventional timeline completely ignores the monumental journeys undertaken for thousands of years prior, an entire epoch of discovery whose only sin was a lack of written records. The Bronze Age was in every meaningful sense a true age of exploration. Its navigators connected continents, established trade networks that moved essential resources across the known world, and mapped coastlines with an accuracy that would not be surpassed for centuries. Their achievements are not lesser simply because their charts were mental and their logs were sung, not written. This perspective forces a difficult but necessary question. Why does discovery only seem to count when it is documented by a particular set of cultures in a particular medium? We must challenge this deeply ingrained Eurocentric view of history. Consider the Polynesian voyagers who were mastering the Pacific Ocean at the very same time these Mediterranean and Atlantic routes were being traveled. They crossed thousands of miles of open water in double-hulled canoes, using an almost identical suite of wayfinding skills. They read the stars as a compass, followed the paths of migratory birds, and interpreted the subtle patterns of ocean swells to find scattered islands. Their maps, too, were woven from memory and story, encoded in chants and stick charts that represented wave patterns. Both traditions, born oceans apart, represent a parallel evolution of human ingenuity. They prove that the drive to explore and the intelligence to navigate are universal human traits, not the exclusive property of any one civilization. To dismiss the Polynesian settlement of the Pacific or the Bronze Age tin routes to Britain as something less than exploration is to fundamentally misunderstand what exploration is. It is not merely the act of being the first to see a new land from a ship's deck. True exploration is the process of creating a reliable, repeatable connection between 2 points across a dangerous and unknown expanse. It is the weaving of that new knowledge into the fabric of a culture, making the once impossible journey a known pathway for future generations. By that definition, the anonymous navigators of the deep past were explorers of the highest order. Their maps, carried in mind and song, were just as valid and sophisticated as any drawn on parchment. They built a connected world with nothing but wisdom, courage, and a profound conversation with the natural world. Acknowledging this does not diminish the voyages of Columbus or Magellan. It simply places them at the end of a much longer, richer story, one written not in ink but on the waves themselves. A Minoan sailor from the Aegean and a Polynesian voyager from the Pacific, separated by 12,000 miles and as many as 3,000 years, would have recognized a kindred spirit in one another. Both stood at the helm of a vessel built of wood and human ingenuity, their eyes reading the same celestial language, their skin feeling the same whisper of the wind. They shared a fundamental truth, that the ocean was not an empty void but a living, breathing entity rich with signs for those trained to see. Their navigational toolkits were strikingly parallel, built upon the same 4 pillars, the stars as a fixed compass, the waves as a reflection of distant lands, the birds as living arrows pointing home, and an oral tradition that preserved this sacred knowledge across generations. Each culture developed chants and stories that encoded sailing directions, turning abstract geography into memorable epic poems. The rhythm of their oars and the set of their sails answered to the same natural forces. Yet the challenges of their respective worlds forced distinct refinements. The Mediterranean, a relatively enclosed sea dotted with islands, allowed for shorter open water crossings where a navigator was rarely more than a few days from a potential landfall. The Pacific Ocean, by contrast, is a vast expanse of open blue where voyages could last for weeks with no land in sight. This immense scale demanded even more precise systems from the Polynesians. They developed a concept of a star compass, mentally dividing the horizon into 32 houses, each marked by a specific star's rising and setting points. They became masters of reading swells, sensing the way a primary ocean wave would bend and reflect around an unseen island hundreds of miles away, creating an interference pattern that could be felt through the hull of the boat. This was wayfinding refined to an even finer art, a response to the greatest navigational theater on Earth. This parallel evolution is not a coincidence. It is a testament to a universal human capability. When faced with the immense challenge of the sea, separated by continents and millennia, two different cultures arrived at the same profound conclusion, that the world could be mapped through observation, memory, and courage. They both reached a pinnacle of non-instrumental navigation, a level of skill that modern sailors with all their technology would find difficult to replicate. So where does that leave us, surrounded by screens and global positioning systems that tell us exactly where we are, but perhaps not where we belong? The legacy of these ancient mariners is not just a historical curiosity. It is an invitation to reconnect with a deeper way of perceiving the world. It calls us to look up at the night sky and learn the names of the stars, to feel the wind on our faces and understand its message, to remember that long before we outsourced our sense of direction to satellites, we carried the most reliable map of all within ourselves. This lost science is now being pulled from the depths of history, not by reading old texts, but by building and sailing. In shipyards from Turkey to Greece, modern craftsmen and archaeologists are using ancient tools to reconstruct Bronze Age vessels plank by plank. One of the most ambitious projects was the creation of the Uluburun II, a meticulous replica of the famous Shipwreck. For the builders, it was a puzzle with only half the pieces. They had to rediscover the feel of an adze in their hands, learning how to shape wood without a single power tool. They fitted the planks using the same shell-first method, locking them together with mortise-and-tenon joints, sealing the hull with hot pitch just as their ancestors did. The goal was not just to create a museum display, but a living, floating laboratory. When the ship was finally launched, its real test began. A crew of volunteers and researchers set sail using only the methods available 3,400 years ago. They had no compass, no sextant, and certainly no GPS. They steered by the sun by day and the stars by night, their navigators standing at the prow, feeling the wind and reading the water's surface for clues. These experimental voyages were humbling. The crew discovered firsthand the physical demands of such a journey, the constant need to bail water, the sheer effort of managing a single large square sail, and the profound disorientation that sets in when clouds obscure the sky for days. Each challenge overcome was a revelation, a direct window into the daily reality of a Bronze Age sailor. This revival is a global phenomenon. In the vast Pacific, modern Polynesian wayfinders have reignited their ancestral art, guiding massive double-hulled voyaging canoes like the Hokulea across thousands of miles of open ocean without a single modern instrument. They sleep in shifts on the deck, their bodies attuned to the slightest shift in swell patterns, their ears listening to the whisper of the wind through the rigging. When they successfully reach a tiny, targeted island after weeks at sea, it is not luck. It is a stunning demonstration that this ancient science works with breathtaking precision. These modern voyages are far more than academic exercises. They are a visceral, physical bridge to our shared human past. Sitting in a replica ship, feeling it struggle against the same currents and soar with the same winds, creates a connection that no textbook can ever provide. It transforms abstract knowledge into tangible truth. The courage required to set out on the open sea in the Uluburun II, trusting entirely in stars and waves, forces a deep respect for the ancient mariners who did this as a matter of routine. This experimental archaeology proves conclusively that their methods were not myth or guesswork. They were a highly refined, effective science of survival, a testament to human ingenuity that allowed them to weave the world together long before the age of recorded maps. The success of these projects does more than validate the past. It challenges our present. In a world saturated with digital guidance, what have we sacrificed by outsourcing our sense of place? The ancient navigator's skill was born from a deep, reciprocal relationship with the natural world, a conversation we have largely forgotten. Their legacy asks us to reconsider what it means to truly know where you are, not by a coordinate on a screen, but by the feel of the wind and the position of the stars. Their entire existence was a conversation with the world, a dialogue we have largely forgotten. Bronze Age navigators possessed an environmental awareness born of sheer necessity, a constant, intimate reading of natural signs that modern technology has all but erased for us. We rely on GPS satellites and digital screens that tell us exactly where we are with a sterile precision, but this convenience comes at a cost. It insulates us. We are no longer required to notice the subtle shift in the wind that foretells a storm, or the specific bird call that signals a nearby coast. This ancient art of observation was not a hobby, it was the bedrock of survival, and it fostered a relationship with the planet that was inherently sustainable. Their navigation was powered by completely renewable resources, the relentless push of the wind and the eternal clockwork of the stars. Their ships were built from wood, a material that could be regrown. Their journeys left no permanent mark on the sea itself, no carbon footprint, only a temporary wake that vanished behind them. Their survival was a direct function of their attention. They had to notice if the water temperature changed by a single degree, because that shift could mean a new current was carrying them off course. They had to recognize if a particular species of seabird was flying lower than usual, a potential sign of coming bad weather. This was a life of profound interdependence, where human fate was woven into the fabric of wind, wave, and wildlife. In our current age of climate change, this deep, ancestral connection is not a romantic ideal, it is an urgent necessity. Relearning how to observe, to truly see and listen to the natural world, is a critical skill we must reclaim. Their wisdom offers a powerful blueprint for a more mindful and integrated existence, a reminder that we are not separate from our environment, but an active part of its complex system. This holistic view, where every element was connected, extended even further to shape how they conceptualized the very space they traveled through, seeing the sea not as an empty distance to be crossed, but as a living, storied place. Distance was a story, not a number. For the Bronze Age navigator, a voyage was not measured in abstract miles or leagues, but in the tangible, lived experience of sailing days. The space between Crete and Egypt was not a line on a grid. It was a narrative sequence, a story with a clear beginning, a challenging middle, and a hopeful end. The first day's sail brought you past the island of the White Cliffs, where the seabirds nested. The second day, you caught the steady northern wind that filled your sail for 3 nights, and on the 5th morning, if you had kept the constellation of the Hunter on your right, the distant smudge of the Egyptian coast would greet the dawn. Each segment of the journey was defined by its unique events and sensory landmarks, transforming a terrifying expanse into a series of manageable, memorable episodes. This qualitative understanding of geography meant a sailor knew a place not by its coordinates, but by its character. He knew the bay that offered shelter from a southerly gale, the cove with the sweet water spring, and the headland where the currents always turned against you. His map was not a sterile set of lines, but a rich tapestry woven from personal experience and communal lore, where every rock and every stretch of water had a name and a story attached to it. Time itself was part of this cyclical, experiential framework. There was no countdown to a destination, only the patient, inevitable turning of celestial gears. The journey took as long as it took, its duration governed by the sun's arc, the phase of the moon, and the temperament of the winds. You sailed with the seasons, waiting for the heliacal rising of the Pleiades to signal the start of the safe sailing season, and you hauled your ship onto the beach before the winter storms arrived. This was not a linear march toward a finish line, but a dance with natural cycles, an acceptance that human plans were subject to the greater rhythms of the cosmos. This narrative mapping did more than just guide ships. It became the primary vehicle for cultural exchange. When a Mycenaean poet sang of a voyage to the land of the Egyptians, he was not just reciting a travelogue. He was embedding foreign ideas into a familiar story structure. His song might describe the strange, flat-topped houses of the Nile Delta, the exotic scent of spices in the harbor, and the peculiar way the local chieftain greeted traders. These details, wrapped in the compelling package of epic poetry, made the foreign comprehensible. A new type of pottery design or a novel metalworking technique was not an isolated artifact. It was a plot point in a shared story of connection. The route itself became a cultural corridor, with each landing point and way station acting as a node where stories, goods, and innovations were swapped and absorbed. The sea was not a barrier isolating cultures, but a dynamic stage where their stories collided and intertwined, all guided by a conceptual map written in experience and remembered in song. A new type of sword did not stay in one place for long. The sea routes of the Bronze Age functioned as a superhighway for innovation, where a revolutionary design forged in a Mycenaean workshop could appear in the hand of a warrior in Sicily within a generation. This was the invisible cargo, the intellectual freight that traveled alongside copper ingots and amphorae of wine. The most profound export was metallurgical knowledge itself. The complex process of smelting copper and alloying it with tin to create bronze was not independently invented in every corner of Europe. It was a specialized science that spread from its origins in the Near East, carried by traders and migrating smiths who sailed from port to port. A master metalworker might travel with a merchant vessel, his knowledge his most valuable possession, bringing new techniques for casting spearheads or crafting delicate jewelry to communities that had never seen such things. The ship was a floating university, and every voyage was a seminar in technology. This cultural diffusion is written in clay. Archaeologists can trace the spread of pottery styles like following a trail of breadcrumbs across the sea. A distinctive type of drinking cup, popular in Minoan Crete, suddenly appears in the coastal settlements of southern Italy. The design was so useful and aesthetically pleasing that it was adopted and adapted, eventually influencing local pottery production for centuries. It was not just the object that traveled, but the very idea behind it. The same happened with architectural techniques. The concept of the corbelled vault, a way of building a roof with overlapping stones, or the design of fortified palace complexes, spread from the Aegean to the Western Mediterranean, carried by sailors who had seen these marvels in foreign harbors and described them to builders back home. The movement was not one way. Amber from the Baltic coast found its way to Mycenaean graves, while ostrich eggs from North Africa were carefully interred in elite burials on the Greek mainland. The sea was a two-way conduit, a relentless mixer of cultures and ideas. Even the gods traveled on these ships. The mythological stories told by sailors around a campfire on a Cypriot beach bore a striking resemblance to those recited in a hall on the Greek mainland. The motif of a hero battling a sea monster or a goddess associated with navigation and the moon appears in different forms across the entire Mediterranean basin. These were not mere coincidences. They were the echoes of a shared seafaring culture, a common understanding of the world's dangers and wonders forged on the open water. As these stories were traded along with spices and metals, they merged with local beliefs, creating hybrid deities and syncretic myths. A Phoenician god of metallurgy might be worshipped near a tin mine in Sardinia, his foreign name slowly blending with that of a local spirit. This cultural exchange created a certain unity, a common vocabulary of symbols and beliefs that allowed a trader from the Levant to find a sliver of the familiar in a distant Iberian port. This interconnected world, woven together by the skill of its navigators, represents one of humanity's first great experiments in globalization. The constant, fruitful exchange of goods, technologies, and ideas across the Mediterranean basin accelerated the pace of human development, lifting artistic achievement and technological sophistication for everyone involved. It was a vibrant, dynamic network that thrived for centuries, yet the very existence of this complex web, dependent on fragile ships and the fallible memories of its sailors, hints at its greatest vulnerability. The knowledge that built this world was not stored in stone libraries, but in the minds of men, and the sea keeps its secrets well. The full extent of their voyages remains one of history's great silent chapters. We can trace the copper and the pottery, but the human journeys, the first sightings of distant shores, are lost to us. How far did their curiosity truly take them? Controversial theories, fueled by stylistic similarities in art or ambiguous archaeological finds, suggest they may have even reached the Americas. While mainstream evidence is thin, the very possibility forces us to reconsider the daring of these sailors. If they could navigate to Britain for tin, what other shores might have beckoned on the edge of the western horizon? Their mental maps were vast, but we only possess the fragments that survived in wreckage and trade goods. We know they remembered, but we do not know exactly how. The mnemonic devices they used to lock complex star paths into memory are a profound mystery. Were there specific hand gestures that corresponded to constellations? Did they tie knots in ropes to represent sequences of stars, creating a physical, tactile map they could run through their fingers in the dark? The rhythmic chants we know existed were likely just the surface of a much deeper mnemonic technology, a complete memory palace built from the sky and the sea, now completely dissolved. Another practical puzzle is how they estimated their speed. Without a log line or any timing device, how did a navigator know how far he had traveled in a day? He may have used the sound of water slipping past the hull, a pitch that changed with velocity, or simply the feel of the wind on his face and the vessel's motion through the waves, a calibration so refined it was a sixth sense. These are the tangible skills we can almost grasp, but the most subtle arts are the ones likely lost forever. We understand in theory that they read wave patterns, but we cannot replicate the nuanced understanding of a master who could feel, through the deck of his ship, the specific interference of an island still 100 miles away. He could look at the clouds and not just see weather, but a permanent stationary cloud bank that consistently formed over a volcanic island, a permanent landmark painted on the sky itself. That intimate, tactile knowledge died with the last practitioners. These gaps are a stark reminder of the fragility of oral traditions, where a single generation's disruption can erase millennia of accumulated wisdom. The silence is not empty, it is full of ghosts of knowledge, and it is this very silence that continues to drive research, from the reconstruction of ships to the computer modeling of ancient currents. The mystery is an open invitation, not just for scholars, but for anyone who looks at the sea and wonders what secrets it still keeps. It asks us to look at the horizon not as a boundary, but as a question. This art of navigation begins with a simple shift in attention. We can cultivate a modern version of their mindset, a way of seeing that transforms our own environment from a backdrop into a living map. Start by stepping outside on a clear night and learning just a few major constellations. Find the Big Dipper and follow its pointer stars to Polaris, the North Star. That single act of identification connects you to an unbroken chain of human experience, a celestial landmark that has guided travelers for thousands of years. During the day, notice the direction of the prevailing wind against your skin. Is it coming from the west, bringing the smell of rain, or from the south, warm and dry? Pay attention to the birds in your local park. Are they circling aimlessly or flying with a determined, direct purpose, indicating a nearby roost or a source of water? These are the same fundamental clues a Bronze Age sailor would have used to build his mental picture of the world. You can practice this wayfinding in your own neighborhood. The next time you walk or drive a familiar route, try to draw a mental map of the journey without using any street names. Rely only on landmarks. Turn left at the big oak tree with the split trunk, not at Elm Street. Your destination is just past the red brick building, not 2 blocks down from Main. This exercise forces your brain to engage with the world in a completely different way. You stop consuming pre-packaged information from a sign and start actively observing, remembering, and connecting physical features. You are building a personal, qualitative map, rich with sensory detail, just as the ancient navigators did. This practice shifts our entire perspective from the passive consumption of technology to an active, engaged partnership with our environment. It fosters a deep situational awareness that would have been second nature to an ancient sailor, an understanding that your location is defined not by a glowing dot on a screen, but by a continuous flow of natural and man-made signs. By doing so, we do more than just honor their legacy. We enrich our own daily experience of the world, finding wonder and connection in the ordinary. This practical engagement, this conscious effort to see and remember, leads us directly to a deeper appreciation of their single greatest tool, the vast and trained power of human memory. Their memory was a vast, organized palace, not a cluttered attic. To preserve staggering amounts of navigational data, master navigators used a technique we now call the memory palace, or the method of loci. They would construct a detailed mental landscape, often a familiar coastline or the very ship they sailed on, and then place each piece of vital information at a specific location along that route. The precise rising point of a winter star might be stored at the image of a distinctive sea cave. The location of a freshwater spring on a distant island could be linked to the memory of a carved figurehead on the prow. To recall the entire sequence of a voyage, the navigator would simply take a mental walk through this palace, retrieving each day to point from its precise, unforgettable spot. This system turned abstract lists into a vivid, spatial story, making the information virtually impervious to being forgotten, even in the panic of a storm. Rhythm and melody were the glue that held this palace together. Complex sailing directions were not spoken as dry instructions. They were sung as epic poems or chanted to the beat of the oars. The rhythm itself acted as a mnemonic cage, locking the sequence of events into a fixed and unchangeable order. A change in the song's tempo might signal a change in course. A rhyming couplet could encode the number of days to sail under a specific constellation. This musical structure made recall easier and faster, a critical advantage when a quick decision meant the difference between life and death. Under the immense stress of a gale, with waves crashing over the deck, a navigator could sing his way through the storm, the familiar rhythm steadying his nerves and guiding his commands. The memory skills honed by these oral cultures were, out of sheer necessity, far superior to our own. We live in an age of external hard drives and digital clouds, where the very act of remembering has been outsourced. For them, their mind was the only database. This was not simple rote memorization. It was a sophisticated, active system of information management. Understanding this sophisticated cognitive art completely dismantles the outdated prejudice that non-literate cultures were less intelligent or advanced. Their intellect was not inferior, it was simply applied differently, focused inward on training the human brain to achieve feats of recall we can barely comprehend today. This ancient wisdom does not belong in a museum. It offers a powerful blueprint for our own future, challenging us to reawaken the innate capacity of our own minds and reconsider our relationship with the very technology that has lulled them to sleep. Our most advanced systems still carry the ghost of ancient wisdom within them. Deep in the training manuals for modern sailors and aviators, there is a crucial chapter on failure. They are rigorously taught celestial navigation, the art of using a sextant to shoot the sun and stars, not as a primary tool, but as an unbreakable backup. This is the ultimate synthesis of old and new, a recognition that satellites can be jammed, electronics can fail, and a single solar flare can wipe out the global positioning network in an instant. In that silence, the old skills become the only voice guiding you home. This is not a rejection of technology, but a profound understanding of its limits. It is the creation of a resilient system where the digital and the deeply human work in tandem, each a failsafe for the other. The same principle is now being reversed, using artificial intelligence to peer back into the past. Researchers are feeding vast datasets into learning models, ancient climate patterns, star positions from 4,000 years ago, ocean current flows, and migratory bird paths. The AI can then run millions of simulations, testing possible routes a Bronze Age ship might have taken from Crete to Sardinia. It can show us the most probable paths given the seasonal winds, revealing the hidden logic behind their legendary voyages with a precision we never thought possible. This partnership between silicon and tradition allows us to see their mental maps not as myth, but as a highly refined, empirically sound science. This blending of epochs offers more than just historical insight. It provides an ethical compass for our own technological future. The ancient navigator's success was rooted in a profound respect for the natural world. He did not seek to conquer the sea, but to listen to it, to move in harmony with its rhythms. This mindset is a vital guide as we develop the next generation of autonomous systems, from self-navigating ships to AI pilots. The goal should not be to create technology that isolates us from the environment, but technology that deepens our engagement with it. True mastery has always been a balance. It is knowing the fundamental principles so intimately that you can operate without the advanced tools, while using those very tools to achieve things once thought impossible. The legacy of those first navigators is not just in the routes they charted, but in this timeless truth. Their story brings us to a final, quiet reflection on what it means to be truly connected in a world of constant noise. Their legacy is a quiet hum beneath the noise of our modern world, a reminder that the greatest journeys begin not with our engines' roar, but with a single, observant gaze toward the horizon. We have sailed across millennia to uncover their secrets, not to find a simpler time, but to witness a different kind of sophistication. This was a world where the human mind, allied with the rhythms of nature, achieved the extraordinary. These mariners did not conquer the sea, they conversed with it. They read the stars as a turning clock, interpreted the flight of a bird as a living arrow, and felt the whisper of a distant island in the pattern of the waves. They mapped entire oceans with a wisdom we are only now, through painstaking reconstruction, beginning to fully appreciate. Their story fundamentally challenges our narrow definitions of exploration. True discovery is not validated by a written logbook alone. It is measured by the creation of a reliable pathway, by the courage to venture into the blue unknown and return with knowledge that connects rather than conquers. The seas they charted became the first World Wide Web, a vibrant network that connected humanity, spreading not just goods, but revolutionary ideas in metallurgy, art, and myth, shaping our collective story long before the term recorded history even existed. As we navigate our own complex modern world, saturated with digital maps and instant answers, their legacy offers a profound invitation. It calls us to look up from our screens and truly see the sky. It urges us to observe the world with a deeper, more patient attention, to listen for the stories told in the wind and the water. They remind us to trust in our own innate capacity to find our way, to build resilient mental maps from experience and memory. The greatest charts are not always drawn on paper. They are etched into the mind and navigated by the soul, a timeless compass pointing toward wonder. We would love to hear your thoughts on this incredible chapter of human history in the comments below. And if you wish to journey with us into more mysteries of the past, subscribe to continue the exploration.